Hello and welcome to Occult Lives, where today I'm going to ask the question, did the ancient Egyptians come to Britain? I have always had an interest in Egypt and its ancient past, with its fabulous history of pharaohs, pyramids and its peoples. I was lucky enough to go there in 1997 on a tour with John Anthony West and felt the country's magic atmosphere. One can feel, sense even, the lingering ancient magic and pharaonic power of that land. That ancient empire made such an impression on other cultures that its history, though fragmented, still pervades into the world's history today. There are many debates as to the actual dating of the pyramids, the Sphinx, and even when actual pharaohs ruled. Various timelines are thrown at us by historians as they attempt to link them to other cultures' histories and records. Hundreds, possibly thousands of mummies have been dug up, and since most of them have had their tombs robbed, there has been little to explain who they were, and so there is much investigation into identifying them. Not much in ancient Egyptian studies seems to be definite, other than we know they were a powerful civilization which lasted for thousands of years. In this show I'm going to talk about some of the theories I have come across that one does not hear often. Did ancient Egyptians come to Britain? I have been researching this for some years, and two of my main sources have been Lorraine Evans' book, Kingdom of the Ark, and L.A. Waddell's title, Egyptian Civilization. There is much debate about whether or not ancient Egyptians were seafarers. Did they travel in big ships? According to most historians, seafaring was not something that ancient Egyptians did, their argument usually being that they could not make ships to do this. But Thor Heyerdahl proved them wrong. I remember as a kid watching the documentaries on this Norwegian and his Kon-Tiki expeditions. In 1969, Thor Heyerdahl and his team created a boat similar to ancient Egypt designs and set sail on it. This trip was called the Ra expedition, and the ship was made from reed papyrus. He set sail on it with a small crew to cross the oceans. This boat got into trouble with storms and the expedition had to be abandoned, but the next year he set sail again with Ra 2, and this time he successfully crossed the Atlantic from Safi to Barbados, a heroic journey proving that ancient Egyptian boats were indeed seaworthy ships. Boat travel was important to the Egyptians. They had the River Nile to travel up and down their country, so they needed to have good boats that lasted. The only other way to travel the country was by land, and that meant through the desert. The ancient Egyptians are credited with having invented the sail. They needed a sail to make use of the breezes on the Nile to help their boats sail, so they knew how to develop good boats. I looked at my Egyptian grammar book and was surprised at how many hieroglyphs had the symbols for mast, sail and boat in their words. Lorraine Evans notes this too in her book. She also points out that the hieroglyph for an expedition has a boat symbol in it, so surely that shows that Egyptians used their boat to go on expeditions across the sea. As I look at Gardner's Egyptian grammar book, I can see that the ancient Egyptians had a full set of hieroglyphs, depictions for boats, ships and their structure, so they knew what they were making. Lorraine Evans also notes that some mummies were found with their corpses wrapped in sails. Ancient mariners, perhaps? Boats, or barks as they were called by the ancient Egyptians, were often found in burial grounds, or smaller replicas of them. The most famous ship that was discovered in Egypt is the one found at the Great Pyramid site at Giza, buried in pieces inside a giant vase, buried in a pit, possibly to be rebuilt in the afterlife for the pharaoh to travel in. It is also known as the Khufu ship, and it has been reconstructed and is on show in a special room next to the pyramid. There was the belief that the sun itself travelled in a bark as it traverses the sky by day and the underworld by night. And as Lorraine Evans again points out, the ancient Egyptians had a tradition of storytelling which involved sea journeys. Lorraine Evans was the second book I came across with a strong argument for the ancient Egyptians coming to Britain. Her book directed me to an old manuscript by a 15th century abbot called Walter Bower, who has written a manuscript known as the Scotchi Chronicon. I hope I've said that right. This is a chronicle of the history of Scotland, and in it he writes about an Egyptian princess who came to Scotland by boat with her husband and other Egyptians. This Egypt princess had a name, and that was Scota, and it is often suggested that this is where the name Scotland comes from. The story goes on to say that Princess Scota and her family became royalty in Scotland, and her descendants became the high kings of this land. Now, in L.A. Waddell's book, Egyptian Civilization, the author discusses, among other things, the pharaoh Menes. Waddell suggests that Menes actually died in foreign lands out in the far west, a land named as the land of the end of the sunset, and that Menes travelled to these far-off lands in a vast fleet of ships. He went on these long journeys for a certain trade. He needed tin, and this land, known as the land of the end of the sunset, was the main trader in this material. Also known as Tinland, it lay to the furthest west one could go. Tin could not be found in Egypt, but it was abundant in Britain and Ireland. It was a visit that was to become an unfortunate end for Pharaoh Menes. He was stung by a wasp or a hornet, and this sting killed him. He was buried in a place known as the Hill of Menes. Abydos is said to be the resting place of this pharaoh. A tomb seems to be erected there, but Waddell and others believe that this was actually a cenotaph to the great king. At this place there is a piece of writing known as the Ebony Labels, and it reads thus: The King Manesh, the Pharaoh of Egypt, the land of the two crowns, the perished dead one in the west, of the sun Hog race, Abu Mahnosh, of the lower or sunrise or eastern, and of the sunset or upper or western waters, and of their lands and oceans, the ruler, the king of the two Egypts, son of the great Shar-Gurna, of the Sun-Hawk race, the Pharaoh, the deceased, the commander-in-chief of ships, the commander-in-chief of ships, made the complete course to the end of the sunset land, going in ships. He completed the inspection of the western lands. He built there a holding in Urani land. At the Lake of the Peak, fate pierced him by a hornet, the king of the two crowns, Manchu. This board tablet set up of hanging wood is dedicated to his memory. His actual burial place is the Hill of Menes in the land of the end of the sunset, which Waddell believes is now known as the Hill of Meni in County Tyrone in Ireland. Wouldn't it be wonderful if ancient Egyptian royalty did walk our fair isles, that maybe some of us are in fact descendants of ancient Egyptians who used to visit our land for trade and bring with them the magic and mystery of the land of the pharaohs, who ruled the Black Land and the Red Land. Thank you for listening.